Today on Fear and Greed, Donald Trump promises big tariffs on his closest neighbours, triggering a sell-off in financial markets. The Albanese government passes legislation aimed to help homeowners, and General Motors wins a slot in Formula One racing and will introduce the Cadillac brand to the sport. Plus, budget blowouts, coal deals and cheap EVs. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Wednesday, the 27th of November, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
That is quite the introduction, Michael. Quite the introduction. Plenty on.
We have a lot to cover in the next 15 or 16 minutes. We're actually putting ourselves on quite a tight time limit today, Sean, so I'm not going to waste time. The main story this morning, Donald Trump has, we're going to be saying that a lot, aren't we? The main story this morning, Donald Trump is upended global trade rules even before taking office, saying he will impose a 25% tariff on all products from Mexico and Canada on his first day in office, and another 10% on goods from China.
Imagine if you were his friend. I would have thought imagine if you were his enemy, I think is what I'm saying.
If this is the way he's treating his friends right across the border, God, it makes things a bit awkward with Canada, right?
Very aggressive comments aimed at the US's neighbours. I mean, Canada's its closest ally.
Yeah.
Anyway, he cited concerns over illegal immigration, that's in Mexico's case, and illicit drugs in the case of Canada and China. Donald Trump says he will sign his first executive order on all products, capital A, capital L, capital L, all products coming into the US. He put that on Truth social media. Tariffs will remain until the countries clamp down on drugs, especially fentanyl, and migrants crossing the border illegally. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that claims the lives of about 75,000 Americans every year. He also attacked China for not carrying out the death penalty for people dealing in fentanyl. While some say Donald Trump's tweets are part of a negotiating position he's establishing ahead of becoming president, they are certainly aggressive. No doubt about that. He scared investors. The US dollar surged, pushing the Aussie dollar back to the low 64 US cent range. That's its weakest level in 4 years. It then bounced back towards 65 US cents. Copper and base metals, they tend to rise and fall in line with expected future economic growth. They all fell. Bond yields jumped. Now, slapping on tariffs like these will immediately push up inflation. If you're buying something produced in Mexico, such as a cheap fridge, that's going to be a lot more expensive, pushes up inflation, pushes up bond yields. The Canadian dollar hit its lowest level since 2020. The Mexican peso tumbled. Even Bitcoin went backwards. It's now down 6% in 3 sessions, though it is still trading at more than 94,000 US dollars a unit. Gold prices bounced. Big reaction to these comments from Donald Trump.
Yeah, and then locally, Sean, yesterday we saw China's ambassador in Canberra, Xiao Chen, speaking. And this came after those series of those tweets. And he said US trade policy is an important element in Australia's relationship with the US. So here we are. We're being drawn into this quite quickly, aren't we?
Absolutely. It just shows the wide-ranging ramifications of what Donald Trump is proposing. The ambassador called on Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to remain a trading friend. Treasurer Jim Chalmers urged calm. He said the incoming US administration will bring different policies. He's confident Australia can navigate these changes. Elsewhere, in a statement, the Chinese embassy in Washington said no one would win a trade war. It said economic cooperation is mutually beneficial. The irony here, Michael, is that cracking down on fentanyl manufacture and distribution is actually an area where Beijing and Washington have been working together for the last year or two. And there is no doubt there is progress on combating both in China, both the manufacture and distribution of it. So it is somewhat ironic that this is what Donald Trump has picked on, because it's an area where they are making strides forward.
It's curious. And you do wonder, you made the point earlier that maybe this is just a negotiating tactic quite early on, considering he is still weeks away from actually taking office, that really it's about posturing at the moment and just establishing almost a precedent for how trade negotiations and the like are going to be run.
Yeah, I mean, but imagine running trade negotiations like this. I mean, some people pointed out 10% on Chinese goods coming into the US. That's actually a lot better than 60%, which is what he said previously. So it's not too bad.
Yeah. So look, on the bright side here, it could be a whole lot worse.
Yeah.
Now, Sean, the news. I mean, this is one of those big stories, right? Isn't it? That just kind of hits everything all at once. And the news certainly hit bank and energy stocks on the local market yesterday as well.
Yes, it did. All the talk of tariffs encouraged some investors to jump in and take profits from stocks that have run hard. The idea there is the companies have done well, but the bad news is around the corner, so let's get out before the bad news hits. Commonwealth Bank, for example, it was down 3.5% yesterday. All the banks were down. ANZ, Westpac and National Australia Bank dropped about 1.5%. By the close, the S&P ASX 200 was down 0.7% to 8,359 points. The energy stocks were lower. Woodside and Santos fell close to 4%, though that was as much to do with reports of a potential 60-day ceasefire in the Middle East. I'll come to that in a moment. What was really interesting were the companies that are involved, Australian companies listed here that are involved in US manufacturing, particularly if you've got operations in that country. So BlueScope Steel, for example, jumped 6%. Building Products Group James Hardie, it has major operations in the US. It jumped more than 2%. Ansell rose, Amcor rose. So those comments, that tweet from Donald Trump, it just hit all corners of the globe.
The power of a single tweet. That is quite remarkable. Sean, after the show, worth a quick mention now of your interview that's coming up. Neil Rogan, Managing Director and Head of Distribution at Russell Investments, because we are talking kind of about markets here, obviously, and kind of things changing. And it goes to the importance of getting good advice during times of volatility, right?
We speak about that specifically. So Russell Investments have put out a report, the Value of an Advisor report. It's their annual report, basically tells you what an advisor gives to you. And we talk about the need in times of turmoil. That's where an advisor really comes to the fore and really does a great job in helping you get through financial stress and financial volatility. So we go into that, into the findings of the report, and they actually quantify the value of an advisor. And it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's a great chat. It's coming up after the show. Don't go anywhere, though. We are still to talk politics and budget blowouts and big news from Google and EVs. Plenty more coming up. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Parliament is in full swing, but one bill that's unlikely to be passed this week, and possibly not even before the next election, to be honest, is legislation to increase the earnings tax on superannuation accounts worth more than $3 million. This has been a pretty controversial one.
It has. Finance Minister Katie Gallagher conceded it was a big ask to get that one through. It doesn't have the support of the opposition or the crossbenchers. She said it still remains Labor policy, even though the government hasn't been able to negotiate it through the crossbenchers. We do have 2 sitting weeks scheduled for February next year, so they could still try and bring it then before the next election. That is assuming we don't get an election called between now and then. The social media legislation, that will pass. Though yesterday, National Maverick Matt Canavan, the Nats, Bridget McKenzie, Independent MP Kylie Tink, they all indicated they had concerns about it, and particularly the speed it's being pushed through Parliament. Laws to back a $16 billion fund boosting public schools and a $3.6 billion wage increase for childcare workers, they were set to pass. And the big one, the Greens backed down in their fight against the government's Help to Buy and Build to Rent housing scheme. We were talking about this 24 hours ago, saying that the government looked like they were really going to lose out on this one. Well, it flipped in a moment with the Greens leader, Adam Bant, seemingly changing his mind on the spot. A weird one. A big win for the government. Help to Buy is the idea that the government will co-own first sort of houses with first homeowners. The Build to Rent, tax incentives for investors come in and build more homes. Both pieces of legislation, which were election promises, passed the Senate yesterday.
Yeah, a couple of big wins for the government there. Perhaps not such a big win coming, though, Sean. Deloitte Access Economics forecasting a blowout in the budget deficit this financial year on the back of a softer economic outlook.
Don't you love a blowout?
Oh, love any kind of a blowout. That's exciting.
Yeah, totally. Now, Deloitte Access is among the most reputable budget forecasters in the country, I would say. It reckons there's about an underlying cash balance of $33.5 billion this financial year, the 2025 financial year. That's more than $5 billion worse than expected at the last budget. Net debt will come in around 20% of GDP, in line with expectations. Now, remember, the last 2 budgets were in surplus, but the government got a free kick. We had inflation, And so that pushed up prices. So they got more money that way. And commodity prices were doing really well. So iron ore, 110, $120 a tonne. They were getting plenty of money from higher commodity prices. We don't have those tailwinds anymore. The good news is the labour market remains strong, but the government will really have to work harder to keep budgets in balance or at least minimise deficits. The point is, the budget has had an unexpected revenue gain on the back of the economy the last couple of years. Whoever has to do it next year and the year after and the year after, it's going to be much, much tougher.
Sean, tech giant Google has backed Australia Connect, which is a connectivity project that will build 2 new subsea cables between mainland capital cities and Christmas Island.
You know how you love space and aircraft? I find fibre optic cables on the seabed fascinating.
That's quite a niche topic to be really into, isn't it? But it doesn't surprise me finding that out about you.
I used to live with a guy who worked for a crowd called Alcatel, who used to operate in Sydney. And his job, he was an engineer, and his job at times was to sit on the back of a ship and they just rolled out the fibre optic cable and he'd just make sure that it rolled out, sank to the bottom, and then they'd have to splice between cables when they were swapping cables over. And that was his job. What a cracking job.
And so it's not actually secured as you go. Like it's just kind of just sitting there loose on the bottom.
Yeah. We had this great debate about, this was 20 years ago or longer, we had this great debate about the environmental damage being done. And I won't say his name. His nickname was Bear, the Great Bear. And he said there's no environmental damage. And I said there's lots of environmental damage. And many beers we had talking fibre optic cables laying on the bottom of the ocean. So it's always been one of my favourite topics.
Oh my God. So your interests are niche, even your drinking arguments are niche.
Yeah, or boring.
Yeah, I was trying to be kind.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I do find it kind of interesting. Like anything to do with like it feels like such an engineering feat to do anything like that. I'm amazed by it.
And I mean, most of the world's internet traffic runs through these cables. The speed of light, they're fibre optic, speed of light. And I think it's quite phenomenal. Yeah. Anyway.
What's Google doing in this space?
Australia Connect. Well, the first cable will run between Darwin and Christmas Island. There'll be a second cable between Melbourne and Perth, then on to Christmas Island and Singapore, according to the Sydney Morning Herald. Subsea cable technology is deployed across thousands of kilometres of the ocean floor. Google's formed a consortium to build the next project. It includes data centre provider NextDC, telco group Vocus, cable provider Subco, the Sunshine Coast City Council, and a bunch of state governments. Communications Minister Michelle Rowland said the cables will expand and strengthen not just digital connectivity inside Australia, but in the Pacific as well. Seabed infrastructure is really critical to national security. Do you remember a story last week?
Oh, yeah.
And it was the 1,200-kilometre undersea fibre optic cable linking Finland and Germany. And they thought they were talking about Russians severing it, which, stuffs up your communications totally. This is kind of the same sort of deal. Love this story.
That's a really cool story.
It is.
The US miner Peabody Energy and Indonesia's... Now, is this BUMA? Is it...
I think we're going to have to go BUMA. I don't think the Indonesians would say boomer. I think
it feels like it's ripe for kind of misinterpretation here. Anyway... Together, they will pay close to $5 billion for the Queensland coal mines of Anglo American.
Peabody will control 4 Queensland coking mines, while BUMA will get 1. Coking coal is used for steel making as opposed to thermal coal, which is used for power generation. Peabody doesn't have a great track record in Australia. About 13 years ago, it bought Queensland miner Macarthur Coal for nearly $5 billion. Ultimately, it then went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Anglo, which in May knocked back a $75 billion bid from BHP, has spent the past 6 months offloading coal assets, particularly, including stakes in Lake Vermont and Jellimba coal mines in Queensland. I think that means it's pretty much out of coal in Australia now. Coincidentally, the 6-month time limit imposed under UK law, which has prevented BHP from coming back and making another bid for Anglo, expires on Friday. There you go.
Oh, okay. New gaming laws landed in Victorian Parliament yesterday with major changes aimed at nullifying problem gambling, Sean.
Things like the maximum amount in a machine at one time goes from $1,000 to $100. Machines will be forced to slow between each game. Carded play will also be introduced. Basically, you have to use a card. The hope there is it can limit how much money a gambler can use. Almost 30% of Victorians who play gaming machines experience gambling harm, and the government is trying to do something about it.
Car dealers, we mentioned this at the top of the show, car dealers are being forced to sell luxury electric vehicles at a loss as demand at the top end succumbs to changing consumer tastes and competition from Chinese EVs.
Dealerships reporting too many $70,000 plus EVs, including from manufacturers like Jaguar, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, according to the Fin Review. A report by investment bank Moelis says the local market is mismatched at the moment. Too many prestige vehicles on the lots, just when the cost of living crunch is biting. Doesn't work. Could get worse next year, apparently. Under the government's new vehicle efficiency standards legislation, car manufacturers are incentivised to increase their volumes of low emissions vehicles. That might be a hybrid, might be an EV. So they're certainly incentivised to get those onto the lots here in Australia. Now, that happened in the UK, and what ended up happening is prices fell. So not just EVs, but also the secondary market, used EVs, their value fell. That could well happen in Australia. Another big factor here is the success of BYD. Its growth is much stronger than Tesla, and also charging infrastructure in Australia still remains too problematic for many buyers.
Okay, turning to international news now, and US President Joe Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron are expected to announce a ceasefire in Lebanon between armed group Hezbollah and Israel imminently, according to a report on Reuters.
Very imminently, Michael. We do this very early in the morning, so it could happen any time. In Washington, White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby said, "We're close, but nothing is done until everything is done." The French presidency said discussions on a ceasefire had made significant progress. In Jerusalem, a senior Israeli official said Israel's cabinet would meet overnight to approve a truce deal with Hezbollah. Signs of a diplomatic breakthrough, though, were accompanied by heavy Israeli airstrikes on Beirut's Hezbollah-controlled southern suburbs as Israel pressed on with the offensive it launched in September after almost a year of cross-border hostilities.
Finally, Sean, how about this one? General Motors has taken a major step towards competing in Formula One car racing under its Cadillac brand as the sport expands quickly in the US. Are you a fan of F1?
No, people in this house are a fan of F1, and the Drive to Survive Netflix show effectively opened up the US market because NASCAR had a hold on the US market, of course, the biggest market in the world.
Yep.
Well, F1, they've gone from one race a year to 3. They're about to go to 4 races in the US a year. Big business there.
Wow, it seems like that the growth of that sport is rivaled only by the growth in pickleball.
Yes.
Isn't that an extraordinary success story?
Oh, my word. It certainly is.
I know we're getting off topic here, but seriously. Anyway, back to General Motors.
So F1 said it has reached an agreement in principle with the US car maker, General Motors, under which Cadillac will become the 11th team on the series grid from 2026. A significant breakthrough in the talks between the two sides, although GM's application to join the F1 World Championship is formally still ongoing. Liberty Media owned F1 since 2017, and the sport has expanded into the US, new races in Miami and Las Vegas. GM's plan to join F1 highlights its attractiveness not only as teams have soared in value due to the growth of the sport, but also because of limits placed on how much they can spend on developing cars. It sort of protects shareholders from runaway costs. So if you're a GM person, you know there's a limit to how much they can spend on the F1. According to the FT, General Motors President Mark Roos said it was an honour to join F1 and described the sport as a global stage to showcase engineering expertise and technology leadership at an entirely new level.
Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Neil Brogan, Managing Director and Head of Distribution at Russell Investments, and coming out in just a few hours. Sean, you better get cracking.
Yeah.
The Fear and Greed newsletter, the free weekly newsletter. Head along to fearandgreed.com.au and sign up for that one. Any idea on what you're going to be unloading on in this? Because this is all about your opinion, your insight, your take on a whole bunch of stories.
Yeah. One thing, Donald Trump, I don't want to talk right about him, but oh my God, there's some revisionism going on at the moment. People saying, look, he won't be as bad. Like people making up reasons to like Donald Trump, driving me crazy.
Ooh, okay. We're going to get your pure, unadulterated, unfiltered inner thoughts today.
Which would be very confusing if I actually did do that.
I would subscribe for that. Yeah. fearandgreed.com.au. Sign up for the newsletter. It comes out in a few hours. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thanks, Michael.
It is Wednesday, the 27th of November, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.